And Iranian commanders vowing harsher revenge against the United States after President Trump dismissed Iran's missile attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq. It all follows a killing of top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. The general chose to replace him and said earlier today that he would follow the same path as his predecessor. Elizabeth Palmer is in Tehran with what this would mean.
In the first real snowfall of the winter, Tehranis going about their business were feeling safer.
Were you afraid that there was going to be a war?
Yes.
Caroline, like millions here, listened to President Trump's speech very closely.
Were you relieved when he said there would not be another American attack?
Yes. I sleep very well. Very well.
The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it.
On Iranian TV, America's decision not to strike back was framed as a climb down by the U.S. and a win for Iran's Revolutionary Guards, who showcased their missile arsenal. One senior commander promised that Iran would take harsher revenge soon. The killing of Qasem Soleimani brought millions into the streets in scenes like these in a show of unity. But the mourning masses don't tell the whole story. Just a few weeks ago, thousands of demonstrators showed their fury and frustration with a government they criticize for its corruption and ineptitude.
But the mood has now changed completely, and those voices of dissent, at least for the moment, have been silenced. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, Tehran.
Ali Vaez is the director of the Iran Project for the Crisis Group. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to resolving deadly conflict. So, Ali, what does this messaging from Iran show the U.S.?
Look, it's at the same time a message of deterrence, trying to make sure that the U.S. does not continue this assertive policy towards Iran and target additional Iranian assets or commanders in the region. But at the same time, it's also aimed at satisfying public opinion at home, because some people were just simply not happy with the fact that Iranian attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq did not result in any casualties and fatalities, which was seen by many in Iran as disproportionate to U.S. killing one of the most revered military figures in Iran.
So Iran's military leaders are vowing to get U.S. forces to leave the region. Is this something that you foresee really happening?
Well, look, the U.S.'s position in Iraq has become more and more untenable, not just because of the killing of General Soleimani, but also because of the attack the previous week on an Iraqi militia that is closely affiliated with Iran. This has been, repeated signs of U.S. not respecting Iraqi sovereignty, and therefore there's a lot of anti-American sentiments these days in Iraq, which makes it difficult for Iraqi politicians to defend continued U.S. presence in Iraq, as well as for U.S. security forces to defend U.S. bases and diplomatic facilities. So I think it's a question of time before the U.S. is pushed out, either through legal means, through the Iraqi parliament and government, or through what we saw between 2007 and 2008, which eventually led to U.S. departure from Iraq in 2011, which is a series of rocket attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq, or roadside bombs, a continuous harassment of U.S. military personnel on the ground in Iraq.
So President Trump indicated yesterday that he doesn't plan on any further military response against Iran. Instead, he announced he's going to impose sanctions. How are sanctions currently affecting the country?
Well, the sanctions have created a very dire economic situation in Iran. The country's economy is shrinking at the rate of almost 10%. Inflation is rising, unemployment is rising, Iranians having difficulty getting access to medicine and medical equipment. And so overall, it's a really difficult situation. But what's ironic about the president's policy is that, in fact, it is the maximum pressure policy. It is the pressure of sanctions that has created the current situation. 3 years ago, before the president withdrew from the nuclear deal that his predecessor negotiated and imposed sanctions on Iran, it was impossible to imagine the Iranians firing missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq. It was impossible to imagine the Iranians targeting shipping in the Persian Gulf. It was impossible to imagine that the Iranians would target oil infrastructures in Saudi Arabia. And all of this has happened as a result of the same policy that the president now wants to double down on.
Ali, you've consulted with Iran. You've consulted with other countries on nuclear negotiations for the past few years. How is the strategy from the U.S., including pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal and imposing these sanctions, impacting the current diplomatic tension?
Well, look, I think already it was very difficult for Iran and the U.S. to come back to the negotiating table because by withdrawing from the only agreement that the two countries had been able to achieve in the past 40 years, the U.S. has already killed the modicum of trust that was created as a result of that agreement. But now, after killing General Soleimani, it has become politically extremely costly for any Iranian official to sit at a negotiating table with an administration who has assassinated a figure that was seen in Iran, correctly or incorrectly, as a national hero. And so I see the prospects of any kind of diplomatic breakthrough at this stage, even through mediation of third parties, quite slim before we know who the next U.S. president will be. So until the end of this year, I don't see any serious chances of a diplomatic breakthrough, which unfortunately means with this crisis deferred now, we're only buying time until the next confrontation between Iran and the U.S. that could stumble into an all-out war with disastrous consequences for everyone.
What's your biggest worry at this point?
Well, my biggest worry is that, the Iranians might not be done with their retaliation for the killing of General Soleimani. So they might still try to assassinate a senior U.S. military official somewhere in the region or even beyond the region. And sooner or later, President Trump might find himself in a difficult position that he might actually need to take military action against Iran on its soil. And from that point on, things can easily spiral out of control. And remember, in addition to things that are happening in the region, the Iranians are also engaged in a nuclear escalation. Every 60 days, they take a step back from their obligations under the nuclear deal. And sooner or later, they would also cross the threshold that would, I think, rekindle concerns about their ability to dash towards nuclear weapons. So we have both a proliferation crisis and a regional crisis on our hands with almost no off-ramps in sight.
Ali Vaez, I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.